Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, an advanced persistent threat called the Mask has been revealed. A slew of home routers are actively being exploited. We'll share the details. Routing basics explained, your feedback, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 150 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on February 20th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, GoDaddy, Ting, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this show goes on. Our live stream, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris. Everybody.
Man, the TechSNAP streak continues. 150 episodes without interruption. That's
exactly.
I don't even. That just blows my mind now. Now we're getting ridiculous.
I know. I'm just like.
It's a marathon.
It felt strange to have a week off and then to be back at it.
How did the dental surgery stuff go?
Good. There's really no swelling you can see it left anymore.
You're all back to eating regular foods and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. After a week, I was back to eating meat again, which I was like, thank God.
And I noticed it didn't seem to
eat so much like soup and pudding.
Yeah. I noticed it didn't seem to hamper your enjoyment of the Winter Olympics. Seem to be still getting plenty of enjoyment out of that. You know what?
Today.
There's other thing I need to follow up on since it's been a week since we've chatted. Everybody wants to know, do you have the fiber connection at your house yet, the gigabit link or whatever it is?
As I mentioned last time, that doesn't come until May.
Oh, May. Oh, I thought you, okay. Oh, I thought it was sooner than that. Well, I don't know, Alan. I'm jealous. I just want to know all about it. Now, what kind of a gear do you have to have in your house for that?
The fiber provider actually provides the customer premise equipment.
Good. So no money out of your pocket.
Because what that will do will convert the copper or the fiber and give me like a regular gigabit Ethernet port that I can just run across the house to my router and problem solve. What I'm wondering about is how much, if I should leave things how they are or restructure my basement to put it all in the back bedroom so that I can contain the noise a little better.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too for the new studio where I'm going to set everything up.
We're looking at like 2 racks of gear. That's a lot of gear.
You are going to have a noise problem. 2 racks.
Well, I don't use my basement for anything else, but I might in the future.
Yeah.
So maybe better to move everything before rather than after.
Yeah. Well, let us know how it goes, Alan. Keep us posted.
Yes. I'm hoping to have pictures and stuff eventually.
So on Sunday, we celebrated the 300th episode of the Linux Action Show, and GoDaddy's doing a network-wide promotion on all of our shows that have GoDaddy. They've done a special $2.90. They've brought the 295.com back because everybody loves that. So before we jump into our first story, which is a big one, and I want to give us plenty of room to cover that, I want to thank GoDaddy.com and use the promo code 295TECH when you check out to get a .com for $2.95. You know, we're launching a new show, and whenever that happens, like we try to buy up a lot of the domain names around that because it's essentially part of the brand, it's part of the name recognition, and this is the perfect time to do something like that. When you have a promo code that gets you $2.95 on a .com, that's cheaper than some apps in your favorite mobile app store. So use the promo code 295TECH when you check out over at GoDaddy.com. The world's #1 domain name registrar is now kicking it up a notch for businesses. They're increasing their platform. Their WordPress hosting is brand new, completely reinvented, and it just looks amazing. It's super fast, super scalable, secure. They've got fantastic administrative control panel that makes it great for working in the teams. And now you can get a .com for $2.95. So use the promo code 295TECH when you check out over at GoDaddy.com. And thanks to GoDaddy for bringing that promo code back. I know you guys love that one. It's a great deal. How could you not? All right, Alan, well, why don't we start with our first news story this week? This one's coming from Kaspersky Labs, right? The Mask?
Yeah,
the Mask?
We hinted at it a little bit a couple weeks ago. Remember they said, and we're going to announce it at our big event they had in the Dominican Republic?
I do remember.
So that finally came out. So we got hints about Care2, which is Spanish for the mask. And it's, remember, originally we speculated based on some other stuff that was happening at the time. They had said that when they were analyzing it, they found a really unusual native language being used, right? Because almost all the exploits we've seen have been like, English, Russian, or Chinese, right? And this one was something else. And we kind of, based on the other stuff, speculated that it was Korean. Turns out, even bigger surprise, it's Spanish.
Oh, I actually wouldn't have guessed that at first. It's not one of the common ones we hear about.
Exactly. So the Spanish-speaking attackers targeted government institutions, oil, energy and gas companies, other high-profile victims, research labs, hedge funds, money marketplaces, all kinds of stuff. And they had a cross-platform malware kit. That's one of the things that makes this one of the biggest attacks. Kaspersky ranks it above Dooku and Red October.
Wow.
So they published their full research PDF. It's big and long and complicated and has all the information. But some highlights. The advanced persistent threat has been going on since at least 2007, if not earlier. They've more than 380 unique victims in 31 different countries. They've sorted out so far. There might be some they haven't found yet. One of the things that makes the mask special is the complexity of the tool set used. They have really sophisticated malware, a root kit, a boot kit, so that goes in the bootloader and reinfects the machine even if you disinfect it. 32 and 64-bit Windows versions of the virus, versions to attack Mac OS X, and even Linux exploits. So, if they exploit the vulnerability they have in Java or Flash, it doesn't just stop because they're trying to run a Windows binary. They actually have a Linux binary to execute against the Linux machines.
Very clever.
And there's also evidence that they may have had Android and iOS exploits to take out phones as well.
Wow, I can, and it went and it ran. It's been running. It has been running for 7 years.
Yes. It might not have had an Android exploit.
Right. So this is what I was going to suggest: is that it sounds like they've been adding, they've been evolving it over the 7 years. So not only has it ran undetected, but it's had improvements, updates to it.
The mask also used a customized attack against older versions of the Kaspersky antivirus product and tried to hide from it. And that's one of the reasons they put it above Dooku in terms of sophistication and makes it one of the most advanced threats that there is out on the internet. There are also several other factors that make us believe that it was a nation state that sponsored the campaign to build this. If it was the criminals just after money or whatever, they wouldn't have needed to be that sophisticated.
Right. Yeah.
When active on a victim's system, the mask intercepts network traffic, runs logs keystrokes, captures Skype conversation, steals PGP keys, analyzes Wi-Fi traffic, and fetches all information off any Nokia device that you connect to it, which is probably, closer to the 2007 timeline when those were popular. It also captures the screen and can monitor all file operations to look for, what files you're working on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The malware collects a long list of different document types, docx and all that kind of stuff, from the infected system, but it also steals encryption keys, VPN configuration and keys, SSH keys, RDP files for accessing Windows servers, and all that kind of stuff. There's also several extensions being monitored that they weren't able to identify, and they believe those are custom military or government level encryption tools. A file type that you don't normally see on a regular computer. But because the virus is looking for them, it suggests they're targeting specific applications used by the government or the military.
Yep.
Overall, they found exploits for Java, Adobe Flash, as well as malicious plugins for Chrome and Firefox on Windows, Linux, and OS X. Names of subdirectories gave some information about the kinds of attacks they launched. They had one that did a fake Java update, downloaded java update.jar, and executed java updt.exe. So trying to look like a Java update when it was actually a Java exploit.
That way, if somebody's just casually monitoring, they might think it's just business as usual.
Yep. One of the interesting things is the Flash exploit they used, CVE 2012-0773, has kind of an interesting history. It was originally discovered by the French firm Vupen and was used to win the Pwn to Own contest in 2012.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It was the first known exploit that was able to escape the Chrome sandbox.
Yeah.
But Vupen refused to share the exploit with the contest organizers, claiming that they plan to sell it to their customers instead. Remember that when we talked about it?
Yeah, I remember covering that on the show, as a matter of fact.
And then a Google engineer went up to the guy that discovered it and offered him an additional $60,000 on top of the $60,000 they already run from the contest to get details on the sandbox exploit to fix it. And he declined and said that he might reconsider if they offered $1 million. But when interviewed later, he said probably even $1 million wouldn't be enough compared to what they get for it selling it to their customers.
Yeah.
So this suggests that the threat actor might have been a government that bought this exploit from Vupen.
Right.
However, the guy who discovered it, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name, denies that it was the VUPen exploit that was used and claims that maybe somebody just reverse engineered the exploit from the Adobe fix for it. But then again, if you sell an exploit to the government for millions of dollars, that's the kind of thing that you'd be expected to claim when the exploit is used.
That's very true. Yeah, I'm sure that's part of the deal.
Yeah. Also, several attacks against browsers that support Java were observed. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the Java files to analyze them because the server that runs them is no longer available. That's kind of the thing about doing the post-analysis on it. Something that's been running this long is that sometimes some of the bits you're looking for aren't there anymore. Mm-hmm. It also exploited a couple of exploits in Java, like CVE 2011-3544. And Wired also has a bunch of extra coverage. But it seems part of it here is that they're just, every exploit they can find they're using, and it's important that people patch their shit.
Yeah. As we've said before on this show.
Yeah, I think we even put it on a T-shirt or something.
Who, us? That doesn't sound like us.
I don't know.
Huh. So, definitely sounds like a state-sponsored thing. I mean, when you have something, first of all, it just sounds like it has funding behind it, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's state-sponsored. But when you add funding and what it's targeting file-wise...
but also the level of sophistication. If you were just out there to steal bank accounts and stuff, you wouldn't be that worried about having it be found.
Right.
Right? You're just about get the bank account, get the money, and get it over with. Right? With that type of attack that, the Russian mafia is famous for, is they're trying to get the information, get out, and be done. Whereas an advanced persistent threat is about getting in there and staying for as long as possible and not getting caught.
Right.
And that kind of suggests a different motive. And generally, individual groups don't have much of a motive to do, legitimate spying.
Yeah, they're more. I mean, usually that's more of a flash. If they'll take advantage of a flash exploit or a Java exploit, but it's more transient. It's not something that they keep working on over a period of 7 years. I mean, if the longer you work on something like that, it seems like the more likely it's going to be tracked back to you.
Right.
Don't you think? Like that kind of they're leaving a trail there in a sense.
Not necessarily, right? If you're just finding new exploits and stuff, and if you take the right steps to cover your tracks, then.
And so what am I picturing right now? I'm picturing like a government agency, and they come down and say, okay, boys, well, a new version of Android's out. And so today, this division is going to be spending the week working on finding a hole in that new version of Android. Then what? Maybe the government goes out and buys an exploit for that team to be able to take advantage of. I'm just thinking through like the practicals of doing something like this.
It literally takes years.
Yeah.
To find an exploit and use it, and then remember that these exploits get found and shut down sometimes.
Yeah.
Or, in the case of this VUPen one, it should have got shut down when VUPen discovered it. They should have reported it and got it fixed instead of not.
Yeah, and I struggle with this reality we now face where governments are increasing the value. So let's go back. Yeah, so VUPen, they were like, well, straight up, we're going to make way more money selling to like a government agency or somebody else than Google paying us even $1 million for a bug bounty. And the problem is that creates an environment where they're fundamentally undermining the security of the entire industry.
Yes, by, let's keep this exploit open so we can use it.
Right.
And
by driving the cost
that
and
other
reward.
People might be using it already as well.
They're also...
Or that might find it.
They are driving the value of that industry up and up and up. So now they're making it where a guy who discovers a flaw in Chrome makes more money selling it to the government, so he's going to encourages more people to do this. That drives the prices up, and it makes it harder for private companies to.
It shouldn't be like a bug bounty is cool, but there shouldn't be an industry of doing this, really.
Right. And we're going into kind of a really kind of uncomfortable territory here.
Well, we're getting into the same arguments we have about DRM, right? When we have anti-circumvention laws that make it illegal to find and post problems with DRM, is that it means it doesn't get fixed, and it means that we all suffer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been an interesting thing we've been watching over the history of this show, because that industry has really blown up over the last 150 weeks. And
it has.
Just sitting here.
I wouldn't really say it existed much before that.
Yeah, I agree. And I wasn't sure if you... I really feel... Or if it did, it was much more under wraps and much more cloak and daggers hidden.
You know, there was... Hackers would sell exploits for like $100 or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you think about it, like PayPal bounties were a couple of $100 and stuff like that. I mean, like the whole thing, the whole scale is changing.
Well, yeah, the Yahoo one was a $17 T-shirt,
right?
Because you know it was about bragging rights originally.
But you know that's what it should be. It should be low value like that. That way you don't have an entire industry trying to find exploits and break things and just undermining the security of everybody. I don't know. I mean, it's like if you find these flaws, we've got to get them disclosed. That way people can be secure. And I'm getting on a soapbox here, and I'm preaching to the choir. But it's pretty upsetting to watch this happen.
It is.
It makes me wish I would have cashed in on it. I kid. All right, well, let me thank IX Systems. I love IX Systems, and you guys should go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. They have an incredible lineup of gear, all powered by the Intel processors, and they work with people who are really a huge part of the BSD community. And we were just talking on the pre-show, too, that they are always out at all of the cons, all the conventions. They just did a blog post on ixsystems.com about their FOSDEM 2014 recap here. It was posted by John Hickson, the senior software developer at IX Systems.
He's one of the main guys behind FreeNAS.
That is what I'm talking about right there. Like, you know that FreeNAS product that we talk about all the time? Well, one of the main people behind it works at IX Systems. That tells you a little bit about IX Systems.
Runs the entirety of the FreeNAS project.
That tells you a little bit about IX
Systems. It's open source. People are allowed to contribute or whatever, but you know they have people on the payroll whose job it is to just sit there and make it better.
They also have a really battle-tested burn-in and QA process, so that way when you get your gear, you know that it's been tested thoroughly by IX Systems. That way you can hit the ground running, get the system set up, and get your job done.
Those are the biggest two things when I buy a server. The first one is, you know, when I'm shopping, when I used to build the servers myself before I just went to IX and let them do it because they're so much better at it than I am, was, you know, it'd be like, all right, I'm going to shop around and pick out the parts. It's like, well, does this part work? Like it says it works with BSD, but you know, when I built that very first ZFS servers, and we did it on this show back in like episode 30 or something.
Yeah.
You know, I bought that AdaptTech RAID card for it because it said on the box that it supported FreeBSD.
Yep.
But it only supported FreeBSD 8, and I wanted to use 9 because it had the better ZFS support.
Yeah.
But at the time, AdaptTech was only doing closed source drivers. And so it was like, well, so this card doesn't work. And it had it's
an expensive lesson.
I started it out, but the card would randomly hang every once in a while. There was a bug. And the card would just go to sleep for like 8 hours and then decide maybe to wake up or not.
Oh, my gosh.
It caused us huge problems. And we're like, oh, well, it turns out in FreeBSD 9, when it actually got released, because we were using like the beta at the time, it had support for the LSI disk controller that was built into the server I bought. So lucky me, I didn't have to buy any more parts. But the guys at IX, they know which hardware works, and they only build systems with hardware that's known to work.
Exactly.
But also, they just happen to have a very, very close relationship with LSI. Currently in FreeNAS, in the beta versions, you can test the new LSI 12 gigabit a second controller cards.
Oh, boy.
For a driver that's not even in FreeBSD yet.
That's awesome.
They're using FreeNAS beta as a way to test it. And then once it's ready in production quality, it will be committed into FreeBSD and be available to everybody.
It's exactly the kind of company you want having your back when you're putting something into production. And the great thing about IX Systems is that not only do they have a great pre-purchase support, but after your purchase is in, they have what they call, and I completely agree with, a white glove post-purchase service. It's a great company, and you can build a relationship with them, and you know that if you're deploying systems in your data center, they're going to be like your partner when you're doing that deployment. So go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. That lets them know you heard about it here on the show. You appreciate them supporting TechSNAP. And also over there, they've got a free book you can get, The Ultimate Guide to Buying a New Server for Open Source, 11 Key Traits You Must Absolutely Demand from Your Provider, and you can grab that ebook too.
Well, and that's the other thing is that I've met almost everybody that works there now. Over the course of a bunch of different conferences and stuff. I've literally met all these people that I've talked. So, you know, when I called them up, it's like, oh, yeah, I remember. We ate cake together at a party.
Before they were sponsors or anything like that, this was last year at Linux Fest Northwest, they showed up and they brought me presents. Like they brought me swag for FreeNAS and IX Systems and BSD, and I got some horns with lights. It was awesome.
Well, that was the great thing was just hearing from their Twitter that they watched TechSNAP in their office.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and they realized after they watched it all, just like, well, maybe we should have our ad up there beside GoDaddy.
And you know what? They're live, probably watching right now. So hi, guys. Hi
exactly.
there out there at IX Systems. Thanks for your support, and go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Alan and I really give them a big recommendation.
John and Josh and Jordan and Matt and Denise and all the fun people. Other Matt.
They're pretty cool over there, I got to say.
Yep.
I'm glad to have them here.
Well, and that's the other thing is, like, when I was building the new server, the giant, 36 drive server, it's like, I've never built anything this big before.
You just want a sanity check, right?
How does the, SAS expander work for connecting that many drives to one controller? And it's like, and they're like, well, you can use 2 controllers, and these enterprise drives are dual ported, so it means each drive is connected to both controllers. So if one of the controllers dies, all your drives keep working. I'm like, really? You can do that? And then once I got it set up and running here, it was like, how do you configure that? Because every drive shows up twice in the operating system. And you want to, make it make sense to the operating system, right? Because if it sees it as 2 separate disks, but when you write to one, the bits show up on the other one, it gets very confused. So it's like, how do I set up multipath? And they're like, oh, you just do this. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, talk about having some experts on call.
Exactly. Well, that's the other. It's like the guy who wrote the multipath subsystem in FreeBSD answers the email. It's
pretty,
like,
pretty authoritative.
Yeah.
I know.
Exactly.
It's just such a perfect setup. It's just so great.
But the other thing is just the range of stuff, right? From like a little FreeNAS Mini, you have, just a desktop machine workstation that Michael Lucas needed. He's like, I'm going to write more BSD books, but I need a computer that's going to work,
right?
And fit enough drives that I can play with disk partitioning and showing people how to set up RAIDs, but isn't going to sound like a server sitting under my desk.
Right.
My wife is going to kill me.
Boy, I hear that.
Or make too much noise in my studio or whatever. And then ranging all the way up to like the server I bought with, 36 hard drives. Or I saw one they posted on their Facebook a couple of months ago where they sold somebody 400 terabyte array. Or, they sold that system to the FreeBSD Foundation.
Yeah.
With 4 10-core processors.
Oh my gosh.
80 threads.
Oh my gosh.
And,
can I just run FFmpeg on that once? I just want to do it once.
Well, speaking of that, it's actually in the roundup, but I'll just cover it quick here. Intel's introducing a new 15-core processor.
Yeah.
The Xeon E7 8893 V2.
Yeah. I know those are for servers, but I'd love to have one.
The stock speed is 3.4 gigahertz with a, what do they call that overclocking thing they do?
The turbo boosting.
Turbo boost to 3.7 gigahertz.
Yeah.
37.5 megs of cache on each package.
Oh.
Supports a maximum of 1.5 terabytes of RAM per package. Oh. So in an 8-way system where you put 8 of these chips in, that would support, 12 terabytes of RAM and 240 logical cores.
So each chip has 30 total threads with hyperthreading.
Yes.
Wow, each one. And if you could put so I'm just picturing like a workstation with 2 of these bad boys in it. That'd be the ultimate editing system.
Well, they wouldn't be the E7, 8, but yeah, there's something similar you can get, yes.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, wow.
Also, but 300 megabytes of cache across those 8 processors.
Yeah, that's really insane.
That doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I just want.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the chat room says too.
Those chips may cost $7,000 a piece, but I want one.
Yeah, no kidding.
8 of them.
So developers, get your multi-threading in order, would you? Anybody?
Yeah, well, that's exactly why they sold that 80-core system to the FreeBSD Foundation. It's like, well, we need to be able to test the scalability so that when this 240-core thing comes out, it'll work.
Yeah.
And that's why it has to have a terabyte of RAM. But also, we kind of want to run concurrent tests on all of our different branches and compile packages for i386, AMD 64, Spark, ARM, every other processor for FreeBSD 8.3, 8.4, 9.1, 9.2, 10.0, 10 stable, 11 stable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, hey, that's a lot of possible combinations of packages there.
I'm still spinning about that cache size. I mean, I'm just thinking like if
that's a big cache.
Yeah. I mean, geez, that's going to be amazing. Oh, I can't wait for the next couple of years when that gets to a reasonable level and I can get it in a desktop machine. All right. Well, why don't we shift gears and talk about this problems that we've seen a lot in these little. Is the term Soho? Is that what does that mean? Soho.
Small office, home office.
Yeah. Okay. So these Soho routers from Linksys and Asus. I mean, these things are starting to have. We're just seeing a whole thread of problems, right?
Well, yeah, it's tiny embedded software made by people in a rush.
That doesn't get updated frequently enough.
And it doesn't have an update mechanism, or if it does, it's very manual. And the biggest one is always, when they're set up with a firmware where if something happens while you're flashing it, it bricks the machine.
Right.
And so it's just not worth the risk trying to update it.
A lot of people don't want, and a lot of people, it's out of sight, out of mind.
They literally don't remember, or they don't recommend trying to flash it unless there's like a known issue. And, once they do that, things go sideways.
And you got to imagine,
it's not that hard to have a system where you can have two firmwares.
Yeah.
It's like pfSense and FreeNAS are based on that system.
Yeah.
You have a partition with two different parts, and you have the current one and the old one. So when you flash it, you overwrite the old one and boot off of it. If it doesn't work, you switch back to the one that was before you tried to flash. Now, instead of staggering like that on, say, a Linksys, you would probably have one read-only that would have, the stock image it came with, and then the one you boot off of.
Yeah.
And if this one breaks, you just boot off the old one so that you can flash it again and get it to work.
Yeah, it'd get you up to the point where you could reapply it.
And almost all BIOSes on like computer motherboards have had that for a while.
Yep.
But, it comes down to with these routers when they're selling for $30, $40 or whatever.
They don't want to spare the 4 megabytes or whatever it would take to have a compressed
not even that,
image.
but yeah, it's like they will literally put 4 megs instead of 8 megs of RAM in it to save 10 cents.
Right.
Because 10 cents times 100,000 units is $1 million. And
this really
that's a whole profit margin for
I mean, you and I on this show so many times have recommended replacing these things. We both don't use these in our network setups because they are just... They're not only do they have tons of software issues, but they're usually, like you just said, hardware underpowered as well. So it's just it's a lot of compound issues.
Most of them have a processor so small they can barely pass. Yep. Some of them can't even handle the 100 megabit connection that people are getting nowadays. Yeah. Or even the ones that can, it's like the 500 megahertz Smith processor tops out at like 250 megabits a second.
Yeah. So the story I saw was about Linksys malware that's spreading, but that's one part of the story, right?
Yeah, at the bottom half of the article, I have a link to a bunch of other ones.
Okay. So tell me what's going on.
So researchers say they've uncovered an ongoing attack that's been infecting home and small office routers from Linksys using a self-replicating malware. And it's likely being exploiting a code execution vulnerability in the firmware.
Surprise.
Johannes Ulrich, the CTO of the SANS Institute, told Ars Technica he was able to confirm that the malicious worm has infected at least 1,000 Linksys routers in the E1000, E1200, or E2400 series, although the actual number of hijacked devices is probably much, much higher.
Sure.
That's just the ones they've actually observed.
Right.
And, some of these are obviously hidden more offline and things like that. A blog post over at SANS published shortly after the article expanded the range of vulnerable models to virtually the entire Linksys E product line. So any Linksys that starts with an E. Once the device is compromised, it scans the internet for other vulnerable devices to infect. So, each one just starts scanning more of the internet until they've compromised every one that they can find.
Yeah.
The compromised routers remains infected until they're rebooted. It doesn't seem to actually make it permanent, but as long as enough, as we saw with the Code Red virus back like 10 plus years ago, with that one, they were self-replicating, and the idea was that on a certain date, all the machines in the world would reboot and erase the virus to stop it spreading forever. But they failed to consider time zones. So as each time zone rebooted, when it came back up, the time zone after it that was still infected would reinfect it. Yeah. And then every machine that was infected ended up staying infected.
Well, and it's nice that a restart clears the infection. I mean, that's a fairly easy, doesn't fix you from getting infected again. But a lot of people don't restart their routers unless the power goes out or they have like some sort of problem.
Every time the internet doesn't do something, they reboot the router.
Yeah.
It's like,
otherwise they run. Otherwise, people just leave them running.
It's like the last time my router was rebooted when the power went out.
Yeah.
It's like my routers have like a year of uptime.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, that's in fact the only time I reboot them.
Yeah, it's like I put off doing stuff that involves rebooting it because it's like I don't want to lose the internet for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I know, I'm hooked.
It's like I have too many open connections. Mm-hmm. The compromised routers remain infected until devices are restarted. They appear to return to their normal state. People who are wondering if their device is infected should check for heavy outbound port scanning on port 80 or 8080 and inbound connection attempts on miscellaneous ports below 1024. Although, if it's your router, most people would have a hard time watching traffic on the far side of the router.
Yeah.
Unless you have another router in front of it or something.
Right.
The attack begins with the remote call to the Home Network Administration Protocol, or HNAP, which, if I remember, is an interface that allows ISPs and others to remotely manage home and office routers. The idea here was to make a protocol so the ISP could take care of updating the firmware on your router for you.
Right.
And managing the configuration, since people are bad at that. Although, we've seen other problems with that when ISPs start offering free Wi-Fi based off your internet connection and things like that. The remote functionality is exposed by a built-in web server that listens for commands sent over the internet. Like, well, that seems like a good idea.
Yeah,
it seems like if you were going to do that, maybe make it so that the commands had to be signed with an SSL certificate or something.
Oh, well, yeah, that's sure. That's true.
Or just something so that it couldn't just come from any schmo.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess, to me, yeah, it just seems like a really bad idea and really poorly implemented. And it's vendor specific because not all vendors have the same implementation, which is always a problem with these kinds of things.
Yeah, but it seems like they should have one where, your ISP, before they sell you the modem, loads it up with their public key, and then when they send new configs or commands or whatever, if it's not signed with their key or one of the keys on the listed, the cache of public keys, of trusted public keys, it should just be ignored.
Yeah.
And, that way the user would have the option of adding more keys of their own or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or
the ISP could sell it with their key preloaded. I mean,
that's what I was saying. The ISP would preload it before they give it to you.
Yeah.
And, maybe the user, if they needed to, would still have the option of doing something. But
yeah, okay, I got you.
Typically, it requires the remote user to enter a valid administrative password before executing commands. Although, what's that going to be? The same password for every modem at the ISP?
Yeah.
Crack one of them and then...
You get most of them.
Also, previous bugs in HNAP implementations have left routers vulnerable to attack without needing to log in. So after using HNAP to identify vulnerable routers, the worm exploits an authentication bypass to run a vulnerable CGI script without needing to authenticate.
Jeez.
Infected devices are highly selective about the IP ranges they will scan when searching for other vulnerable routers.
To avoid detection, I'm sure.
Yeah. The sample they tested listed only 627 blocks of /21 and 24. Basically, only going after home internet connection ranges rather than trying to go after, you don't want to scan servers that aren't going to have Linksys routers on them.
Yeah.
The discovery comes a week after researchers in Poland reported an ongoing attack used to steal online banking credentials that involved hacking into the user's home router and changing their DNS settings.
Clever.
Yep. The phony domain name resolvers listed in the router settings return victims' computers, tablets, smartphones to send them to the wrong IP address to get to the bank. Why there's not something making sure you're going over SSL for that? It seems like the bank should be using HSPS.
Well, I suppose it falls down at the user. The user doesn't even probably notice they're not on a secure site.
Right, but that's why there's the HSTS, where when you go to the bank legitimately, it says, "Hey, I will always, always, always be SSL. If you ever see me not SSL, it's a lie."
Yeah.
And now that requires having gone to the bank once before you get infected, but still.
Yeah.
And they would use that to steal your banking login because they would send it to them over not SSL or a fake SSL or something. Mm-hmm. The objective behind the ongoing attack are unclear, given that only observable behavior currently is to temporarily infect a highly selected range of devices. One possible motive is just to test how reliable a self-replicating worm is when targeting specific routers. 2 days after the article was published, Linksys representative issued the following statement. Linksys is aware of a malware called the Moon that has affected select older Linksys E-series routers and select older wireless and access points in routers. The exploit to bypass the admin authentication used by the worm only works when the remote administration access feature is enabled, which is not by default.
Okay.
Customers who have not enabled remote access feature are not susceptible. So yes, most people should have that turned off, and you should never turn that on.
Yeah, that's very, that's a good point that Linksys, good on them for pointing that out. However, there was an ISP operator named by Brett Glass who said a range of devices that are vulnerable is much likely wider than originally reported. He says that they're seeing a ton of traffic, and he says that E-Series routers as well as Valet routers and some with the WRT part numbers, for example, WRT 160, are also vulnerable to this. And they're seeing traffic, and that's one of the reasons this ISP knows about it, is because they're seeing the traffic generated by it.
Yeah.
Do you think that some of this, like experimenting with getting into these routers, is sort of a response to computing shifting to tablets and smartphones, because it's a little bit harder to get malware on there, but if you can change the DNS, then the tablets are just as vulnerable as anything else, right?
Not really. It's just that, when a computer's behind a NAT device like that, you can't usually access it directly, right? So the only vector's been, phishing or getting people to go to a malicious website and hit them with a Flash or Java exploit.
Right, but
this system allows you to break into somebody's home network. Right. Once you exploit that router, you can then island hop through it and get to every machine in there, which gives you, all these Windows XP machines without the patches, or even Windows 7 and 8 and 8.1 machines that don't have enough patches.
I guess I'm just thinking, these malware authors have enjoyed exploiting the hell out of Java and Flash for so long, and neither of which are available on tablets or smartphones. There's no exploits to take advantage of.
Well, most smartphones actually have Java, actually, but one of the other big ones is that if you get the router, you can spy on everything going back and forth.
Yeah.
You can
just all general
probably
traffic.
steal a lot more credentials that way.
Yeah. Yeah, logins to
and it
mail.
gives you a great opportunity for man-in-the-middle attacks.
Yes. Yeah, and really just logging somebody's DNS queries can be useful, right?
Exactly.
And, and even if it's just swapping out ad networks and putting your own ads in there you're getting paid for, it could be as...
that's one of the biggest ones is that we've seen is people literally just hijacking every Google search and routing it so they get the ads revenue from Google.
If you think about it, it's in their best interest.
Every ad network.
They got to keep that going as long as possible. So they don't maybe even want to do anything with malware. Maybe they don't want to really make it all that obvious.
Even that, what they can do is replace the ads on legitimate websites with a Flash or Java exploit ad.
Oh yeah.
And that's how they can infect the computer, where, a user who practices good internet hygiene and doesn't go to any bad sites can get hit while they're going to CNN.com if their router is substituting the ads on CNN.com with Flash exploits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I bet this is going to start happening a lot more.
Yep.
And it sounds actually pretty plausible.
And these specific Linksys routers are not the only ones with problems. Slashdot has a big article about how home routers are actually currently the biggest risk of cyber threat to consumers now. For example, in other Linksys and Cisco routers, specifically Cisco's line of home gigabit security router, they actually stuck the word security on it. Contains a backdoor in the software that was put there in 2005, and they forgot to remove it.
Oh, jeez.
So like a developer backdoor, and it got left in production since 2005. And Cisco sells a device that says gigabit security router with a backdoor they knew was there.
I think we have been getting consumers to deploy Linux boxes for years now, and so many of them are unpatched. And so many of them are running like the 2.4 kernel and things like that have untold vulnerabilities in them that are not being updated. And it's not just there; it's the web servers that are vulnerable, right? It's all kinds of things. The one-off custom protocols that they have built in to make setup easier. And
it makes me wonder, why aren't all these routers based on BSD?
Right, and honestly, it's not we're picking on Linksys here, but it's not just Linksys. We have links in here about Asus and other router manufacturers. Same exact problem.
Well, because if you remember a year ago, we covered Rapid7's did a big white paper on how there were 50 million routers that had UPnP flaws, and they covered every brand.
Yes, right.
Because, they built this custom firmware with what the newest version of the UPnP was when they started development in 2005.
I remember a ton of them just copy and pasted the spec.
exactly. But they didn't update that software when they made the newer versions of the router.
Right.
So they're still using exactly the same version of this UPnP daemon that was like a pre-release version in 2005, and they're using it in routers they're selling in 2014.
And, it matters a lot as like more and more stuff goes over the internet. Like a lot of customers have cell phone extenders in their house, and that goes over the internet. It tunnels the cell call over the internet. Email accounts, people's cell phones are just checking email all the time over their home connection, over the Wi-Fi. Yep. They're not thinking about if that's SSL or not.
A lot of people don't think to check the little SSL box when they're checking their email on their phone.
Right. Or,
so that means that, when you're at Starbucks and you're on the Wi-Fi and your phone's checking your email, if someone's listening on the Wi-Fi, sniffing, they would get your password if you're not using SSL. Because if you're transmitting it in plain text, that's plain text.
Mm-hmm.
In the air.
Well, think about all the people that like...
Yeah, it's the same as screaming your password out loud as you walk around the coffee shop.
I couldn't even give you a rough number of how many clients I've worked with that have like an IMAP server that they use for their employees and no SSL.
Mine won't accept connections except on the SSL port.
That's the way to do it.
Only with SSL.
Yeah. Or if they do have SSL, they're all self-signed, and the users are used to seeing these error messages, and so they just click right through it. It's
for the last couple of years, but more than that, for a long time, it's worth it to buy the extra. It's like you can get an SSL certificate for even you can get the subdomain like mx1. or mail.yourdomain.com or whatever. SSL certificate's like $10. Or what we did was we just got a wildcard one, like star.scaleengine.net.
Yeah.
It was like $80.
Yeah.
For a year, and that covers, like, we literally have like 70 domains covered by that one certificate now.
That just seems so obvious. It hurts my brain a little bit, I gotta be honest.
So, further bad news for Linksys. Yesterday, researchers published a Stack Overflow bug in the Linksys WRT120N routers that exploits the vulnerability in Stack Overflow in fprintf. It's a C function that people shouldn't use. And they have all the details there on how to exploit it and do whatever you want, basically.
Oh, yeah, they sure do, don't they?
Yep. They break it down in probably a little more detail than most people really want, but it's all there.
This is great.
And then Tenable.com has a good write-up on more problems they found with the HNAP protocol. And they're like,
let's stop using this, basically.
HNAP is like pressing the easy button.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not a good thing.
Not when it's the critical part of like your border security.
Yeah.
Let's take off the easy button.
Yeah.
Let's figure out another way to do that.
Yeah. Ease and security don't mix, right? Security is always a trade-off. And, it's hard to find the balance between making it easy enough that people will do it.
I know.
But good enough that it's worth doing.
Yeah.
But a lot of times what we see is just enough so that, by sticking the word security in the name of the product, that will sell more of them and people will feel safe because they have a security router.
And gigabit, too, which means it's a fast security router.
Yeah. And I bet that thing will not route a gigabit.
Right, yeah. Totally.
Just because it has a gigabit port doesn't make it gigabit.
CPU probably can't handle it.
And so Ars Technica, as a follow-up, has ASUS routers vulnerable, including the RT AC66R-U, the N66R and U, the AC56U and R, the N14U, N16, N16R, etc., etc., etc.
I guess,
an easily exploited flaw.
What could average consumers do? Just buy a router every year? Buy a new router every year? I mean, what can...
No, but get something that runs open source software and update it on a regular basis.
Yeah. That's...
We
got to educate them, Alan. We got to educate the people.
Put pfSense on it and just keep it up to date. Or DDWRT or OpenWRT or whatever it's called, if that's what floats your boat.
These open source firmwares are better too because there's the incentive structure is set up that updates actually make them better and give them good features. Like I'm thinking of pfSense specifically. Every time a major upgrade comes out to pfSense, I'm stoked. Like it's a bunch of great stuff. Speaking of which, you guys just had a chat with one of the pfSense guys, right?
Yes, we on yesterday's episode of BSD Now, we interviewed one of the lead developers, Chris Buechler, and he told the amazing story of what happens when you need a router that can handle 1 million concurrent connections.
Oh,
not what most people need at home, but any old server running FreeBSD, running pfSense, right, with like a couple of gigs of RAM will do that. And it's like, oh, you need it to handle more sessions? Stick in another gig of RAM. It'll handle more sessions. You want a Cisco box that's guaranteed to do 1 million connections? That'll be $100,000, please.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that interview will be out Friday morning over at Jupiter Broadcasting.
Or you can buy another gig of RAM and stick it in your old machine, and now it'll do 1 million sessions at once.
I can't wait to watch that interview. I love pfSense.
And they're working on pfSense 2.2, which will be based on FreeBSD 10. Uh-huh. FreeBSD 10 has a bunch of SMP improvements to the PF firewall that mean it'll be able to route more packets per second and more bandwidth in exactly the same hardware.
Oh, that's awesome. That's what I'm talking about. Like, you're never going to get that update to your Linksys. That's,
yeah.
You know? There's no reason.
In Linksys, they want to sell you a new better model. They want to sell you a brand new machine.
Yeah.
Whereas the pfSense, they're like, we just want better software.
Yeah.
And we hope that you'll love it enough, you'll go to store.pfsense.com and buy a t-shirt or something.
Yeah. Oh, I should do that. I should get a pfSense shirt. I really love it.
And it's like, they sell premium support contracts. If you're using it in a big company and you need the support contract you would get from the Cisco. Yeah. Well, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than the support contract from the Cisco. Plus, the machine is, got 3 less zeros on the end of the price. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of zeros.
Yeah, seriously. And
how often can you get, 5 times better for 1,000 times less?
It's one of those things that people have this preconceived bias. Oh, pfSense will never be taken seriously in enterprise, but I see it getting more and more deployed in the enterprise.
It's used all over the place. And if you need a Cisco replacement, there's a separate project for that called the BSD router project. Mm-hmm. And that's, no manager-friendly web interface.
Now, what you won't like this, but have you heard of RouterOS and RouterBoard?
No.
So they are trying to take on Cisco. I have this sent in to me by a viewer of the Linux Action Show. His name's Noah, and he has altispeed.com at altispeed.com is his company. This is it's a box right here. It's about the size of a little, it looks like a 5-port switch. And it runs a common platform called RouterOS, and they have a router board. And they have several models of the router board, and with more ports and more processor and encryption accelerators and whatnot. But the key is, it has a very Cisco-like syntax and setup, and it's the same OS and feature set across all of the machines. It's just individual machines have more hardware in them, like more ports and processors. And so you learn RouterOS once, and it's an open-source router operating system. Well,
I think it's open FreeBSD and for OpenBSD for sure, there's a shell called NSH that gives you the Cisco syntax on your OpenBSD machine. In yesterday's episode of BSD Now, we also covered the Ubiquiti Edge router, which is a little MIPS device with like 3 or 4 ports, looks like a standard router, and you can run FreeBSD or OpenBSD on that. pfSense itself is i386, like standard PC hardware only, like x86 and AMD 64. But there are other ways to do it if you want to use smaller hardware. But, if you go to store.pfsense.com, they have lots of different hardware that you can pick from. And, Netgate also has the stuff. And at New York BSDCon, they actually laser etched the metal frame, one of these, and gave a couple of those away. They're really nice.
Oh, cool.
The guy beside me won.
That sucks. That stings, Alan. That stings.
Well, I don't feel too bad because I wouldn't have used that because I have a giant Haswell machine. That's my router.
Yeah.
But it would have been cool to show it off.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we would have given it away here, but that's regifting. So I don't know. Maybe we'll buy one from them and give it away or something.
There you go. Any other thoughts on that story?
Nope, that's about it for that story.
All right, well, I will thank Ting.com. Ting is mobile that makes sense. No gimmicks, no BS. You just pay for what you use, plus taxes. And by the way, no contracts, no early termination fees. That's right. Go to techsnap.ting.com to get started. That lets them know you heard about it here on the TechSNAP program. One of the great things about Ting is every single Ting plan includes hotspot and tethering. I absolutely love that. And they also have excellent customer service. You can call them at 1-855-TING-FTW anytime between 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. and a real Canadian answers the phone. They're very pleasant, as you might expect. Ting also has an excellent self-starting community over at help.ting.com where you can go get answers to a lot of your own questions on your own. I've always been able to use that. Ting has an excellent range of devices. I talk a lot about their high-end Android devices. They also have a personal concierge shopping service to get you a compatible Ting device. They've recently been featuring the Sanyo 3810 Black and Red. These are excellent feature phones. You can get these for $52. Go to techsnap.ting.com. That'll take $25 off your first device. Techsnap.ting.com. You get a device like this that has an OLED screen on the front with the clock. It's a really nice feature phone. Couple of days worth of battery life, and with no contract and no early termination fee and only paying for what you use, the value is it's amazing. Ting also is now accepting iPhone 4 and 4Ss. You can find out more information about that. They're at the Ting BYOD page. They accept all kinds of devices. They also have a deal right now on the HTC One Red, which is an excellent, excellent phone. And Ting also has an early termination relief program where they'll pay up to $75 per line in Ting credit that you have to get canceled. So think about this. So if you're in a contract right now with a carrier who's taking advantage of you, you could go over to techsnap.ting.com. You can take $25 off your first device. Then port your number. After you pick out your Ting device, submit your ETF claim to Ting. They'll give you a $75 credit, and that's probably going to pay for a couple of months' worth of Ting service. My Ting service for 2 smartphones. I have an HTC One and a Nexus 5. I always have the Nexus 5 with me right here. Boom. Love the Nexus 5. And I love the HTC One. I'm paying $33 a month for my Ting plan. That's 2 smartphones, high-end devices, tons of data usage, tons of... I have these things on all the time using them. I love them. And I got to tell you, I've never been in a position where I feel like I'm more in control of my mobile experience. So go to techsnap.ting.com, go see what I've been talking about, check out their blog. And by the way, Ting also responds to your questions and your queries on Twitter. You can find them at TingFTW, at TingFTW on Twitter. They're also on Google+. And they're very active online, as well as that customer service number. They're just super great. And they just recently reduced their data rates as well. So if you haven't tried out that Ting savings calculator...
Yeah, that was the greatest thing. They're like, we just turned 2 years old. So how about we make everything cheaper now?
Yeah. I mean, here's a birthday present for you guys from us. And what was really cool is I had the privilege of kind of getting a heads up that this was coming, but I wasn't supposed to say anything for a little bit. And I knew that the way that deal came about was Ting was at the 2-year mark, so they were renegotiating the contract with their MVNO provider, and they said, you know, we're just going to pass the savings right on to the Ting customers. We could not say anything. We could just sit on this new savings that we've just got and just make more money. But they said, the way Ting, and this was so great, and they have videos on their blog that explain this, the way Ting is structured is such that they were able to pass that savings right on to you guys. If you're an existing Ting customer, your data rates just went down. If you're thinking about switching to Ting, that's more value than ever. So if you go to techsnap.ting.com, they have the savings calculator linked right there on the front page. Click that, put in your information, and just see. Just see if it's worth it. I'll tell you, I've been using them for over a year, and I'm absolutely thrilled. And I really feel like as mobile devices become more and more of a platform that we do our computing on, these kinds of companies are becoming more and more important. Voting with your wallet has never mattered more than it does right now in this industry. Ting is trying to clean up the rest of the mobile industry, and we can all help them do it by switching over to Ting. So techsnap.ting.com. And a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
And for Canada for having Ting.
Yeah.
But like in the chat room, you see it's like there was one guy like last week. It's like, yeah, we switched Ting. My family saves $70 a month now.
Yep.
It's like if we added together what all the people in the chat room have saved from switching times the number of months they've been switched.
Totally.
The pile of money that it would just be like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. It's awesome. And you know, it's actually been kind of really nice for Ange and I, because we're trying to cut costs where we can, and it's been perfect. Because before I was paying $120 a month. It's just now looking back at that seems absolutely insane. Such a waste of money. Okay, Alan. Well, is there anything else we wanted to cover in the news segment before we jump into feedback?
No, that's good.
All right, very good. Well, you can find links to everything we covered in the news segment. Copious links this week to additional coverage. All of the router vulnerabilities are there, and all of that kind of stuff, as well as everything else we talked about and Alan's highlights of the most important bits. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and you can look at TechSNAP 150 and you'll find the show notes, links to everything we talked about. But with that all done, it means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, like our first submitter, starting a thread over at links.techsnap.tv, the official subreddit of the TechSNAP program. Alan, our first email, or subreddit post, I guess I should say, comes in from ASDF Crazy. And he wants to know about disk or file system level encryption and how we manage it. He says, I've always wanted to do file system level encryption on my servers, but I'm always afraid I'm going to forget the keys. I currently use KeyPassX for password management, but it doesn't seem quite like the right tool for this job. He goes on to say, how do you do file system level encryption and then manage your keys? I'd be especially interested to hear from someone doing enterprise-sized deployments of file system level encryption.
Reminds me of someone we should get on interview for BSD Now, who was actually given a talk about this, but I can paraphrase a little bit of what they did.
My question, I guess, would be, what is the point on a server to do a file system level encryption if the server is always running and the users logged in have access to the data?
Right. I guess if your concern is the machine being seized.
Right. I mean, that's where file system level encryption would be good on a server, is if the machine gets taken and it gets powered off or logged out.
Right. But yeah, it's less useful on a server generally. I don't do much of it because it only adds a risk and slows it down. So it's, and most of what I'm hosting is public files, so it doesn't matter so much. But you can do both disk or file level encryption. For disk level encryption on FreeBSD, we have GELI and GDBE. GDBE is interesting because it's what's called embassy grade encryption. So what it has is a system where you can, say the bad guys are trying to breach the embassy. You do a command, and it destroys the keys.
Oh.
Now, when they come in and have you at gunpoint and ask you for the key, you give them your password, and it's like, that's the right password, but that key was destroyed, and the data can't be gotten back. Or it says wrong password, it's the wrong password, in the hopes that that won't get you shot in the head for not giving them the password.
Yikes, Alan.
And some other features like that. It's a little more overhead than what most people need, and that's why we have GELI, the more traditional, just scramble my files so that my laptop gets stolen and somebody doesn't get my data.
Windows has BitLocker, of course, built in, and there's IncFS on Linux, which we've talked about before, is not necessarily a great way to go.
Right, like we did. There was a security audit of it recently.
Right.
Now, for file system level, on FreeBSD, there's PEFS, the Personal Encrypted File System, which actually sits above the file system. So the files that actually sit on the file system are encrypted, but so is the file name. So if you look at the encrypted version, you'll see your regular directory structure, except for all the file names and directory names will just be long base64 encoded strings of gibberish. And then when you mount it with PEFS, then the files will show up with the real names, only if you put in the right key.
Okay.
And the contents of all the files are encrypted as well.
The other thing I was thinking, like, if it was...
And so that one's more designed for home directory encryption, and you can tie it in with PAM so that when you log out, it unmounts your home partition.
Right, that's
and
what I was
when you log in, it mounts it again. And that way, when you have different users sharing a laptop or something, they can have their separate encryption.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if it was just data at rest, he could encrypt the partition and then unmount it, or he could do TrueCrypt volumes and have them unmounted, and that would be one way to protect it. And
we had mentioned that NKFS had a security audit, and they found quite a few major problems. PEFS just had a security audit, and there were a few minor things, and those will be fixed, and it definitely looks better than NKFS as far as security goes.
I would say, though, on average, if it's a server that's running all the time with active user sessions on it, even if they're just system-level processes like Apache and things like that, you're not gaining a ton, because if any of those things are compromised and they have access to the file system...
Sometimes there's rules and stuff that you have to follow, though. For example, the guy I mentioned, Brad Davis, we'll have to try to get him on BSD Now for an interview, but at VBSDCon, he did one of the lightning talks about what his company does. So they're storing credit cards on their server in a database, and so they have to be encrypted
regulations
for the PCI DSS. So what they do is they use Geli-based encryption, and they have the keys without a passphrase on them stored on USB sticks. And so one day they had to move their servers physically from one colocation to another. Right? So they power off the systems, remove those USB sticks, and put them away, right? Or like, they stayed
Secure
with
them.
the administrator.
Yeah.
And then they could pack up the servers in boxes and ship them FedEx. And then one guy just had to take this bunch of USB sticks with him on a plane, go to the other place, and hook the machines back up.
That's nice.
And that way, the credit card data wasn't at risk while it was in transit.
I could see doing like on a home NAS if you're where you might get somebody might break into your home.
You could do the same thing like with those servers. You could plug that USB stick in, start it up, and then unplug it.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and then the key's not available except for when somebody brings that USB stick to the server. Now, depending what you're doing, if you're like me and you rent servers in foreign exotic locations, you don't really have that ability so much. Although I could probably get away with it with IPMI, but anyway. So yeah, on a server, it's not always that popular of a thing to do. But yes, if you're worried about losing the password, if your biggest worry is losing the password, it's probably a sign you don't need encryption. You have to be much more worried about it has to be to the point where the data getting in the hands of somebody else is worse than you losing the data because you couldn't remember the password.
Yeah.
Right? So only if that risk is high enough is it worth the risk of encrypting your data.
Now, do you want to? You've mentioned it before. Do you want to share how you do your keys for like the encrypted data that you have with Scale Engine?
Right. Well, we just encrypt specific data with GPG, right? So like all of our customers' credit cards are individually encrypted. And the main reason we do that is because it's asymmetric. So instead of having a password to encrypt it or something, it has two different keys instead of one. And that way, our web server has the public key and can encrypt the cards when you log in and give it a credit card. So the server can encrypt it without having the ability to ever decrypt it. Then the key to decrypt it is on a pair of USB sticks, and I just plug it into my machine and use it to decrypt the cards when I want to charge them. It's a huge pain in the butt because I have to manually decrypt each credit card when I want to charge it.
Yeah, I could see that.
So it takes like an entire day at the beginning of each month for me to go and charge all the credit cards. But it ensures that there's no way that someone hacking the server could ever get access to anybody's credit cards.
Yeah. All right, Alan.
And, the keys are air gapped so that, even if someone broke into my computer, there would only be that short window when they might be able to get access to the keys.
So I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this next name. The chat room was no help. I was trying to prompt them, but I'm going to say Gergen. What do you think? Garegin? Gargin? It's a hard one, Alan. But he's confused about default routes. Maybe you can help him out. He says, I read the CCNA and the CCNP, and I'm still confused about default routes. Say you have the following scenario: internet to modem, modem to router 1 to router 2, connected to LAN 2, which is bridge to LAN 1. Router 2's WAN port is connected to router 1's LAN port. Router 2, or so people tell me, will have a default route to router 1 because it's directly connected to the other interface. Router 1...
There's a misunderstanding right there, but we'll get back to that.
Okay. Router 1 would need a static route or a dynamic routing protocol setup to hop to router 2's LAN. The question is how does this work? Why does one have an automatic default route and not the other way around? How is it decided on which router gets the default route? He said, I would normally ask this kind of question to the Cisco forums or on the PFSense forums, but I want the question more exposure so that other people can benefit from the answer too. Thanks.
Because when he's reading the CCNA and CCNP systems, when they talk about a router, they're not talking about a little Cisco. They're talking about a real router. And there's a difference in a couple of things here. The one thing he said was that, router 2, or so people tell me, will have a default route to router 1 because it's directly connected. That's the misconception right there. Normally what routers have is a routing table that has a list of all the networks it's directly connected to. Then a default route is how it finds every network it's not directly connected to. Right? Because so if you're a router and you have, some people on the left and some people on the right, and you have a packet comes in from your user and says, I want to go to the network on the right, you're like, I'll look at my routing table. Ah, yes, the network on my right is on this port. And send the packet. And the network on my left is on this port. I'll send the packet. And then you get a request that wants to go to Google. It's like, well, Google is not connected to any one of my ports. So the default route tells which router I should send it to when I don't know where else to send it. Now, in the case of your home routers, they only have one upstream connection, right? They unless you're using a dynamic routing protocol or something, they don't ever have a route to anywhere except your ISP usually. Mm-hmm. So in this case, when you have router 1 and router 2 connected, because router 2's WAN is connected to router 1's LAN port, it just means that as far as router 1's concerned, router 2 is just a client, a computer, not a router. And so client 2 is just getting the IP address, its IP address, and the default gateway information via DHCP, right? Because router 2 is being treated as a client, not as a router. So that, yeah, if you're on LAN 2 and you want to send something to LAN 1, the default gateway information on the computer on LAN 2 will say, send it to the router, because the router will know what to do with it. And then the router says, I don't know what to do with it, but I have a default route of router number 1, so I'll send it there. And router 1's like, oh, I actually happen to have a connection to LAN 1, so I'll send it there. Mm. But when the computer on LAN 1 gets that and sends a reply, it doesn't know where LAN 2 is. So it sends it to its default gateway, which will be router 1. And router 1 is like, I don't have a direct connection to LAN 2. And I don't have a route to router 2 because I don't even know that's a router. So I'm going to send it to my default gateway, which is the modem out to the internet. And so it sends the packet out to the internet, and the internet's like, that's a LAN packet. You can't have that. I'm going to just delete that because that's not supposed to come out to the internet. And so, yeah, you have to have either a dynamic routing protocol where the routers will talk to each other and add each other to the routing tables, mm-hmm. or a static route where you teach the router, hey, router 1, to get to LAN 2, you have to send the packet to router 2 so it knows how to get there.
Very good.
Hopefully that makes sense.
It does.
But yeah, the biggest confusion is if you're reading books about real routers and then trying to apply it to the little ones. But yeah, if you're going to have routers connected like that, I'm not sure if it's line wrapping or stuff that's messing up his diagram a little bit, because it shows LAN 1 is directly connected to the internet with no modem, which I'm not sure. Yeah. Or if that's supposed to be over here, but I'm guessing it was actually supposed to come off router 1, but I don't know. But yeah, that's where the confusion's coming from. So the default gateway in the Cisco literature, it's usually referred to as the gateway of last resort.
I like that.
It's basically, so routers are all about knowing about their neighbors, but these cheap little home ones don't have any neighbors. All they have is send it to the ISP, right? And then the ISP will be like, well, we have some peers where we're directly connected to the ISP down the street. And so if you're there, I'm going to send the packet that way out of this port. But if you're not, then I'm going to send it upstream to my transit provider, who then will have some peers, and then we'll have a default gateway, and it'll keep going until it eventually gets there. So yeah, a default gateway is a gateway of last resort. It's like when I don't know where to send this packet, I'll send it here, assuming that the guy above me in the tree knows more than I do.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a faith. And hopefully that makes sense. I think it does.
Yeah.
All right.
So yes, to solve that problem, I question why you have two routers like that set up on the LAN. But a static route, so that on router 1, you have to say, to get to the subnet of LAN 2, forward the packet to router 2. And you'll have to use the IP address router 2 has in router 1's LAN slot, right? Because when you set up a routing table, the destination address always has to be one that's not routed, right? It has to be something you're directly connected to. Right, so router 2 has two interfaces, right? One in router 1's LAN and one in LAN 2. So on router 1, you have to say, to get to the IP range of LAN 2, forward it to this IP address in router 1's LAN, which is actually the WAN interface of router 2, which gets very confusing. And if you've got it set up like I think you do, router 2 is using DHCP, so its IP address may change. You're going to want to change that to static, otherwise your route might randomly break one day after like a power cycle or something.
Been there.
And yeah.
Next email comes in from Merc X, and this, guess what? ZFS question. He says, I'm trying to move a couple of ZFS pools from ZFS on Linux to FreeNAS. Can you give me a broad overview of the process and what topics I should research more thoroughly to make sure I don't lose any data? Thanks.
So I'm not sure if he's actually tried it yet, but in general, it literally should be zpool, export, name of pool on the Linux machine, and then connect it to the FreeNAS, and they have a GUI for importing it, but it's the equivalent of typing zpool import blah.
So what kind of connection is that? Does ZFS have like a network transfer?
Sorry, he's not saying that. I think what he's talking about is when you do the export, then you physically take the drives out of the one machine and then put them in the second machine.
Right, okay.
If you want to do replication, that's different. That's ZFS send and ZFS receive.
Okay. So send can do over the network.
Yeah, so send you can do over the network. But the export idea is literally you export the pool and that disconnects the hard drives, and you physically pull the disks out of the one machine and put them in the other machine, or just boot the same machine off the other OS.
Right, and of course, as Nikki's pointing out in the chat room, it's actually pronounced ZFS.
I said ZFS.
I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was correcting myself. So it sounds like if
I had a whole argument the other day about why it's zpool is okay, but ZFS is ZFS.
All the things you worry about, Alan.
Well, basically because if it's a capital Z, right, because it's the letter Z, then you pronounce it Z.
Okay.
But if it's a word like zpool, then it's zpool. You don't pronounce it zebra. It's still a zebra.
It's true. But, well, like Tubbs was pointing out in our chat room, make sure you have a backup because bad things can happen.
The export-import process will not change any data. So you should be okay.
So
always have a backup.
Export-import process if he's moving the drives physically. ZFS send if he wants to transmit it over the network to the FreeNAS box.
Yeah. The procedure for ZFS send, I'm in the process of committing to the FreeBSD handbook. Of course, that's in a project branch. I have a website on my personal website that has a copy of the work in progress documentation that explains how to do it, though.
Oh, okay.
So let me just grab a link to that real quick.
Toss that in the show notes.
Yep.
All right, well, while you do that, I'll read Andrew's email. So Andrew wrote in, and he says, new estates near my house are getting fiber to the house with what he's calling a central modem. Even their free-to-air TV is piped through the fiber so that new houses don't need a TV antenna, cable or satellite dish, or even a copper telephone line. The internet modem is also built in. They get a network point to plug their router into, and away they go. But is this really a good idea? With the recent stories you guys have told about modem firmwares and router firmware security holes, are these built-in modems really the best idea for new homes? The way Australia is currently going, there's a good chance that the copper networks will be replaced, and we'll replace all of these with these central hubs with our cable TV and free TV services, phone and internet all running through them. Thanks for the shows, Andrew in Perth, Australia. He's a regular listener of LAS, Linux Unplugged, TechSNAP, and SciByte. So this is interesting. So the house, they're building the router and modem into the house. Helen, I mean, like we were just talking about these things not getting updated. Let's talk about something that's actually physically built into the house. Is this, I mean, have you heard of this before?
Well, it depends. Like, there are condo communities and apartment buildings and stuff now that have, a fiber to the building, and
then
like the building 5. Is their own ISP or something.
Yeah.
It depends. Most people are happy to just have the internet, but I wouldn't like it if somebody else had control over too much of my connection.
I'd want to have almost like a firewall between. I almost feel like I'd want my own router and firewall in front of it. Or I guess behind
you're getting into like double NAT.
Yes, I know. Yeah. I'm not so sure this is a good idea. And I would love it if he'd send us in if he's got...
like part of it is also, the difference in terminology when he says new estates. Like, is he talking about individual houses or is he talking about like an apartment building or condo complex?
Probably both.
Yeah. Well, because if it's a house, it's less likely that they're going to have something centralized like that. Whereas, for an apartment building or a condo community, it makes sense, right? If you're going to have this giant building, having a system where you need a modem in each apartment is more work than having a big modem in the basement and having, Cat 5 in every room.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we'd like to hear more information about that. But yeah, they're talking about, having TV and stuff over the thing. Well, yes, TV is just data. Even now, like when you have cable, they're literally just sending the data over IP. Yeah. So it's not that big of a difference.
Yeah, and it's going to be more and more. It's going to be more and more. All right, well, this next one's taking me to task, and well-deserved, too. It comes in from Oded. He says, Chris, I wanted to remind you something that you probably already know, but find it easy to ignore. The U.S., as a U.S. resident, your internet experience is much different than people in the rest of the world. Now, this is in reference to, in 149, I mentioned that I was worried about, like Brazil and different areas of the internet sort of balkanizing in regards to the latest NSA revelations and then wanting to build their own internets. He says, many services that you now take for granted are walled off from internet users and the rest of the world, with a few exceptions. He points out, here's a partial list of services that I want to use and would be willing to pay for, but can't access because I'm not inside the walls of the U.S. Netflix, Cartoon Network, almost all streaming sports events, free or pay-per-view, most YouTube commercial content, the Disney Channel, Amazon Prime, streaming or downloading of content like movies and MP3s, all Google Play except apps, and most premium iTunes content. He says the list goes on. I would really welcome other countries. I would really welcome other countries closing their borders to the U.S. traffic. I think it's a way past due for the internet citizens around the world to wrestle control of the internet from the U.S. People living in glass houses should not be throwing rocks.
Now, in this case, this is not something that actually applies to the internet. Like, Netflix is not allowing you to watch content because they don't have the license for you to watch it in your country.
Right.
That's the copyright holders. Like, you're still able to physically get a route to Netflix. You can go to the website.
Yeah.
They just will say, go away.
And that was kind of my point. And I didn't mean
that's the difference between what Chris was talking about and but Chris was kind of misunderstanding anyway. What Brazil is talking about is just making sure that when they want traffic to go from Brazil to the UK, that it doesn't go through the US where it can be spied upon.
Although
the UK might be a bad example because they're spying on it and sharing with the US anyway.
I'm just worried that that's step one of creating a segmented internet. But
right. But as soon as you have an IP address where you can't get to it from somewhere else, then that's not the internet anymore.
Right. And so like these things like Netflix and iTunes, and these are all artificial limitations that they are implementing.
Imposed by copyright.
Because of the agreements they have.
It has nothing to do with the infrastructure of the internet.
It sucks, too. I mean, it really sucks.
It sucks. As someone who lives in Canada and gets the shitty version of Netflix, because I get only the stuff they could manage to license in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And, there's a few things, like I'd like to be able to watch the CBC and the BBC. Can't do iPlayer. But, as far as, the U.S. really... Because a lot of those companies are here, we're
right. Well, part of the reason for the CBC and the BBC is that they're publicly funded, and so they can't have other people getting it for free.
And everybody knows about the VPN trick, of course. But
right,
it's still stupid though.
That only tends to work for so long with Netflix. Yeah. That seems like a VPN.
Yeah.
Well, at first it did. I don't know, but yeah.
But the point is well taken, and it's worth spending a little time on in this show.
Yes. Well, it'd be really great if content producers, like, say, Disney, were like, hey, we would like to make this shit happen in other places.
Yeah, we would like more people watching.
If Disney is streaming it off Disney.com, they should be able to do it. Part of the problem is that they entered in these long-term agreements. Like, the reason why Netflix has so much trouble in Canada is that, when they're in the US, they just go to, like, Universal and buy all their movies, and they go to MGM and buy all their movies. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the MGM, when they went to Canada, they sold their movies for each year to a different company to distribute them in Canada. Or they sold it to a company with like a 10-year contract, giving them exclusivity for all of Canada.
Yep.
And so Netflix has to deal with all these separate companies.
Yep.
And the later in the process it is, everybody thinks that, oh, well, my movies are worth so much more money than all these other movies.
And, as long as consumers are demanding this content, then the people creating the content can use these artificial, ways to manipulate companies like Netflix and Apple and Amazon. Yeah. And you are seeing companies like Amazon and Netflix respond by creating their own shows that they can license themselves directly, like House of Cards.
And they're doing very well.
Yeah.
But also, I think that's I'm hoping that the media companies will catch on that people would want to just watch it on Netflix. They don't want a sixth service to have to go, we don't really want to have each movie company having their own streaming website, and I have to subscribe to all of them or something.
Yeah, nickel and dime me. Yeah, I do feel the pain. It sucks. It's a dumb situation. Yep. Hey, something though that might pick you back up. We have a special limited run Linux Action Show 300 hoodie, t-shirt, and ladies tee now, as well as a long sleeve shirt. It's got the new logo on there, and the funds raised by these shirts over at teespring.com/last300 are going towards our studio renovations in the new studio, which begin at the end of this month. That's when we're going to start renovating. We've sold 439 of our goal to 754. Now, none sell and none ship. And nobody gets charged either if we don't reach that goal. However, I'm hoping we will, because every single shirt is coming with an awesome Linux Action Show coin, sporting the brand new logo. Somehow we managed to go 300 episodes and not have an official logo for Linux Action Show, so we've recently rectified that. I'm wearing the gray version. Which will make
it so much easier to make fun of now.
Well, and people recognize it. Like, they recognize Linux in the name, and they recognize Tux immediately. Like, oh, that's Linux. So that's cool. Like, when you're in public, I never even thought about that aspect of it. People actually know what it is.
That unplugged one is pretty good design as well. Kind of reminds me of the old Ontario Hydro one, because it was OH, and they put it together so it made it look like an electrical plug.
Nice. That is cool.
Which is kind of what you guys did with the E.
Yep. So teespring.com/last300 to get yourself a shirt or a hoodie.
That's teespring.com/last300.
That's an important piece. And that new logo is so awesome. Circular logo. So thanks to everybody who's grabbed them. We're getting closer. 439. I think we'll reach our goal. We got 2 weeks to make it, so I hope so.
I would imagine so at that rate.
Yeah. Although it's slowed, so you never know. Go ahead.
Yeah, it always has.
Yeah,
I'd love to actually see them do a graph of it, because I imagine if we looked at the graph from the previous ones, we'd see and have a better idea of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And every time we do this, we've figured out like new things, and Teespring's been really awesome. They've been working with us to get the quality up to the next level.
I love the fact that you have the different colors. I like that blue.
Yeah. And they've been really cool about making it easy for us to switch, so we have multiple versions. So it's all under one total commit goal, but we have multiple different types of shirts.
Right, because normally it's
just one shirt.
Yeah. It's more complicated.
No, they've been really cool.
You have a pink version in the women's one.
Yep, for the ladies. Yep. Or white. And we just thought, so one of the things is, so Teespring now, like, the shirt quality has gone way up. The print quality is great. Like, every time it's just gotten better and better. And so check it out. If you've gotten one of our shirts before, this new one's even better than ever. And even though I like the old ones quite a bit, I'm loving this hoodie. I mean, it's super comfortable. I've been wearing it. Yeah. Well, I won't say how much. It's a little embarrassing. All right. Well, that's our feedback.
And then once that's done, and a little bit later, in probably the end of March-ish, we'll have the BSD Now t-shirt coming out.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to say anything, but look forward to that coming too.
We're working on it.
Yeah. And all of these, like this, like, people don't know, like, it takes a lot of work. We worked on this shirt for a solid month before we announced it, and it was a big lead up time. And we've been working. You guys have been working on the BSD Now one for weeks, right? Maybe longer. Yep. So
not that long.
And it'll be probably the end of March-ish.
Yes, we got a good designer, and
you guys
got
did.
It done.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great design. You guys are really going to like it.
Sort out the printing and stuff.
So we want your feedback. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact, choose TechSNAP from the drop-down, send us in your sysadmin, security, ZFS, FreeNAS, routing questions, whatever it might be, or start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and we'll feature it in a future edition of the TechSNAP program. But Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, give you some links to follow up on your own after the show, and a lot of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Now, we've been talking about Krebs on security a lot, and our first story goes back to that Target breach. And now we have a little bit of details on how the HVAC vendor, how their network was penetrated, right, Alan?
Yeah, so it's how the attackers got into the HVAC vendor to then break into the HVAC management system at Target using the vendor's credentials to then break into the payment terminals, and then from there to get into the Target network to get out to the internet.
Yeah.
Quite a layered attack there, but it may have all started with just some phishing.
All of this comes down to some phishing?
Technically, it'd be spear phishing because they went after that vendor specifically, possibly. It's really suspicious. It's like, if you wanted to target, how would you know which HVAC vendor to go after?
So
it's possible that this was all luck. They were out spearfishing for things and just happened to get the HVAC vendor that did target.
Maybe.
Or maybe it's an insider attack. I don't know. It's pretty.
I mean, it's one of the largest credit card breaches ever.
Yep.
So
but if you want more of the details, Krebs has a great article over there.
I was mentioning on the stream that this whole Target credit card breach has come home to roost at Jupiter Broadcasting, because we've had a bunch of people changing their credit cards on their PayPal and Amazon accounts, and when that happens, the monthly subscriptions get canceled. And so we contacted a few, because we've just had a whole bunch recently, and thankfully Amazon gives us kind of a hint that it was a credit card change, so we contacted some of them and said, hey, what's going on here? And universally, it's been, Target credit card breach, had to change my credit card, or my account was suspended because of suspicious activity due to the Target breach. And so a lot of monthly donors to Jupiter Broadcasting just have been cut off. I don't even know if people know about it. And so here's the story we've been following.
That's the worst one with PayPal. As soon as you change the setting in your credit card in PayPal, it cancels all your subscription, and you don't always notice.
Yeah,
like it's not like, oh, hey, I'm going to cancel all your subscriptions. Would you like to renew them? Or, even just say, hey, you change your credit card. Do you still want to keep the subscription?
Just sort of.
But no, they make you have to manually go set it up again.
I find
and then everybody's like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, and then it never happens.
It's fascinating, because we've been following the story, and now it's sort of hit Jupiter Broadcasting in a real way. Speaking of Target, sounds like there might have been some warnings about issues at Target, right?
Yep. So the Target IT guys, the cybersecurity team, had raised concerns about the security of the network months before the hack happened.
Oh, weird.
They're like, hey, management, problems. Let us fix.
Yeah.
And the management's like, oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that costs too much money.
Happen.
No.
Yeah. And
should listen to them.
That happens.
Yeah. Well, another security researcher that we love to cover is Schneier, Bruce Schneier. And Schneier is post at Schneier.com. He did a talk at MIT about a month ago, or earlier this month, about the NSA.
A couple weeks ago, yeah. It was live during the last time we filmed the TechSNAP.
So we have a link in here. I'll play a little bit of it.
Sorry about the people standing. My favorite part about the NSA story and all the NSA documents are the code names. I think code names are pretty cool. I think we don't have enough code names in our life, and we should really think about where we can use code names. I'll give you a few of them. Muscular. Muscular is NSA's program to collect Google and Yahoo user data by eavesdropping on the trunk lines between their data centers. This was done probably with the help of Level 3 Communications. Level 3 was their provider for those trunk links. Level 3's code name is Little. I think as a general rule that if your data supplier has an NSA code name, you're probably screwed from day one.
So I'll link to the full talk, because this looks like it's going to be a good one, and I want to watch this myself. And I'm glad he posted this online, too. He's got it posted on his blog, so we'll have a link to that in the roundup section of the show notes if you guys want to watch the rest of that. It looks like it's about
17 minutes long.
Yeah, it's not too... No, 54 minutes long.
Okay, then my download is broken.
But yeah, okay. So this is probably pulled right out of the not a big surprise at all department. Verizon, according to the Wall Street Journal and Ars Technica, is seeking payments from Netflix to help sort of subsidize the cost of carrying Netflix traffic over its network. And a Verizon spokesperson was quoted as saying, Verizon has a policy of requiring payments from networks that dump more data into the pipes than they carry in return. When one party gets all the benefit and the others carry all the cost, issues will arise. This was Verizon's head of public policy and government affairs saying, Netflix, pay up. And apparently this has been brewing for several months. Sounds like crap to me, Alan.
There's a couple of big things to consider here. First of all, the Verizon network is always going to pull in more than it pushes out. That's the whole point of a consumer network.
Right.
Is it consumes traffic and doesn't make that much.
That's why I'm paying Verizon for my home connection.
Well, it's not just that, but it's like until P2P came along, upload from consumer connection was almost nil.
Right.
It was always going to be more data going into Verizon's network than coming out.
Right. That's why they sell it like that. They sell the plan structured that way.
And that's the other thing. So Verizon's like, hey, Netflix, we've decided that you have to pay us because we've oversold our customers more bandwidth than we can actually serve to them.
And now that they're probably not even using, I mean, think about it. So what does a good Netflix connection need? 4 megabits, really?
Yeah.
So if you're selling me a 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 megabit connection, and I'm only trying to use 4 megabits, then you sold me the wrong thing. And the other thing
you oversold and lied.
The other problem is we all know, because we've talked about it a lot on this show, Netflix offers these free BSD-powered CDNs that they'll put in the ISPs to help offload the content so that way it's local delivery.
This is a machine that costs thousands of dollars, and Netflix will give you as many as you need for free if you're an ISP and you're big enough to offset the traffic. So that because it costs Netflix less money for transit, they have to because the way the internet works is the person who uploads the data pays for it. So Netflix is already paying over here to upload that data. And so they're paying for it to be uploaded, and then it goes to Verizon. And then Verizon's like, no, we think you should pay for it twice. Because, it's our customers that want to watch Netflix, and they're paying us for access to the internet, and we're just going to not give it to them unless you pay us more. The hell is this?
And it's, of course, and at the same time, they're not taking the solution that Netflix has created for them to help offload this, to help reduce the transit across their whole network. And it's. But
yeah, and that's So Netflix is, we'll give you these boxes, you put them in your network. It costs us less, it costs you less, it makes everything faster. Yeah, but instead, Verizon's trying to extort Netflix,
and that's just the beginning. I'm sure they'll be knocking on Google's door, on Amazon's door, and then eventually,
because
smaller networks.
YouTube uses lots of traffic too.
Oh yeah, so does Amazon Prime.
Yep.
This is in recent light. Yesterday, the FCC chairman came out and said that they will not be attempting to apply, despite what was reported. Actually, they will not be looking to reclassify ISPs as common carriers. They're not going to attempt to do that, and their plan is to do a one-on-one basis as market issues arise. Then they will handle each case on its own.
Yeah. So Netflix is trying to resolve it in like 4 different ways, and Scott Long from Netflix gave a little talk about it at NYCBSDCon, and we should have video of that pretty soon. But the other big one is Comcast is basically doing exactly the same thing. They're like, we refuse to turn up more transit to Netflix because we want Netflix to fail because we own a third of Hulu, and we'd rather Hulu got big.
And both Verizon has their own competing movie streaming service, and Comcast they have their hands in every pot, from NBC to their Comcast On Demand service that is video on demand. I mean, they're directly at competition with Netflix, and Netflix is forcing them to behave like dumb pipes, and they hate that.
Yep.
Oh, so frustrating. All right, Alan, well, we have a RAID reliability calculator in the roundup this week. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so this is just the thing that helps you work out the numbers, do the math. So if you take, say, a regular drive, if a consumer drive, the manufacturer spec says the mean time between failure is supposed to be like 750,000 hours, but we'll use a more realistic number of 250,000 out of the dropdown.
Okay.
Then you enter the non-recoverable error rate. This is will be in the spec sheet for your drive. For most consumer drives, it'll be 10 to the power of 14. And then you set the size of your drive, size of your sectors, how many disks you have, how many separate RAID volumes you've built, and how fast you expect that RAID volume to rebuild, at what speed. So if you punch in 10 3 terabyte drives as one volume with a rebuild speed, the default of 15 megabytes a second, if you have a RAID 0, you can expect that a RAID to die after 1.4 years. And, if you look at something like a RAID 10, that'll last a little while, or RAID 5, and then all of a sudden you're looking at RAID 23 or RAID Z3 will last forever. But if you drop it down to like a pessimistic value, assume you got really chunky or bad hard drives, a RAID 0 will last 0.2 years before one of the drives throws an error. Whereas a RAID 10 will last a bit longer. But a RAID 5, you got 1.9 years before it's going to lose all your data. Where you're going to lose 2 drives at once.
This is a great tool.
A RAID 6 theoretically might last 23 years, which is also the same as like a RAID Z2. But if you use RAID Z3 from ZFS, it will last 12,000 years.
What?
Obviously, the hard drives won't last that long. No. But that's how long they would expect to go between when a drive fails and you replace it with a new one and it rebuilds at 15 megabytes a second.
That's a really cool tool. I'll have a link to that in the roundup section of the show notes.
Or it's a little easier to read that they have a table at the bottom that's the chance of failure each year. A RAID 0, in the first year, you have a 99.1% chance that your array is going to fail. RAID 5, you're looking at a 39% chance. But by switching to RAID 6, just having one more drive of redundancy, that drops your chance of failure from basically 40% to 4%. Wow. And by adding that third drive with the RAID Z3, it's now 0.008%. And even 10 years on, the RAID Z3 is only 0.08%.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the supermarket giant Tesco, right? Is that how you say it? Tesco.
Yep.
They had
a big British one.
They had 2,000 accounts posted on a tech sharing site, probably Pastebin or something like that, of customers' accounts, and so they started disabling them But it says here they were attacked. What's this?
Well, they
Somebody
were breached like everybody else, and they posted 2,000 accounts as an example. It's not clear whether Tesco reset only those 2,000 or everything, because they really should have done everything.
Yeah. Yeah, is it more than just that? Or was that just an example? All right, well, now we've got an image, several images of the history of data storage. This should be pretty interesting, starting with the IBM 305 RAM. Oh, man, I think I used to work at a place that had one of those. I worked at a data center. Oh, my gosh, 2 megabytes. I worked in a data center that had some of these IBM units hooked up to a System 390 mainframe, and they had tiled floors with fiber channel running between the mainframe and these big units here. And some of these looked a lot like this. The Seagate ST506, it cost $1,500 per drive, which is the equivalent of $4,261 in 2013, and it only stored 5 megabytes for $1,500.
Well, that was 5 million characters. That was a lot at one point.
Yeah. The 3.5 diskette, of course, started at 360 kilobytes and then worked its way up. Yep. And then the first 3.5-inch hard drive, the Rodime RO351, 6.38 megabytes. My first hard drive was 8 megabytes. That's when I got in. And it was
my first was 400 megabytes.
Whoa! Then the first 2.5-inch drive, which came out in 1988, 20 megabytes. That's pretty good. You could put your whole operating system and some games on that one. And then the Western Digital Caviar made its debut in 1990. Look at that, with a grand total of 40 megabytes, ladies and gentlemen. 40 megabytes.
Yep. Gosh. And then it goes on all the way up. And then the sad one is at the very end, they have the Dell Cloud Stick with infinite storage.
Yeah. This one happened while we took our week off, quote unquote off, even though we had a show. The Kickstarter site had a compromise, and they say here that on Wednesday night, they posted this on February 15th, law enforcement officials contacted Kickstarter and alerted us that hackers had sought and gained unauthorized access to some of our customers' data. Upon learning this, we immediately closed the security breach and began strengthening security measures throughout the Kickstarter system. While no credit card data was accessed, some information about our customers was. Accessed information includes usernames, email addresses, mailing address, phone numbers, and encrypted passwords. And they go into a little bit of detail in an update here. Older passwords were uniquely salted and using SHA-1 multiple times. I cannot talk today. And more recent passwords were hashed with bcrypt.
So before they were doing like manual salt a password and hash it a bunch of times with SHA-1 instead of doing something proper. And they don't say when more recently was.
Right.
And also, I love how it says encrypted when they meant hashed, but at least the newer ones are bcrypt.
Yeah.
But they don't say how much newer and maybe like what percentage of users were using the new ones versus the old ones. And also it's kind of interesting that the police had to call and tell them they'd been hacked.
What I was going to say. Yeah. Like they had to be informed. And so I think because they use Amazon payments, there wasn't a risk of credit card number disclosures.
Right, because they only have a token, not the actual credit card.
But if you use that same username or more importantly, that same password anywhere else with that email address, you still have a problem. You need to go change your Kickstarter account, and you need to probably change anywhere else you use that password.
Yeah, you shouldn't be using the same password anywhere else, but anyway.
Well, we've told them that already.
So, next story.
Yeah.
PEFs, the personal encryption file system for FreeBSD we talked about. We have a link to the security audit. We covered the same thing for NKFS a little while ago, so I thought it was only fair to show the BSD one.
Okay. So a 13-hour security audit on the private encrypted file system. The audit uncovered several minor problems, some of which may compromise confidentiality. But it sounds like they're already going to be working on fixes.
Yep.
Well, there you go. So we'll have that report if you use that linked in the roundup.
Yep.
Look, another Verizon story. Verizon trademarks.
Terramark.
Terramark. Good. Okay.
Yeah, this is another company that Verizon just bought.
Terramark data center tour, huh? Oh.
Yeah, so this is a tour of the Terramark data center, and which Verizon just bought. So
it's picture porns of the data center they just got their hands on. Nice. So there's 10 slides if you guys want to check that out. And oh man, look at those generators. Oh, it looks like you could run a city off this thing. This is a serious data center. All right, so you guys got to check that out. And our last roundup story this week, healthcare sector vulnerable to hackers, researchers say. What? That's my reaction to this story. As the healthcare industry rushed onto the internet in search of efficiencies and improved care in recent years, it has exposed a wide array of vulnerable hospital computers and medical devices to hacking, according to documents and interviews.
Yep.
Color me shocked.
As if anybody didn't expect that, yeah.
Yeah, but I know we do actually have some folks who work in the IT sector in the medical industry, so this will probably be a report they want to go grab.
Yep, and it was also kind of what part of the second, was it second or first? First of the Mark Rusinovich novels covered as well. 0 Day? Mm-hmm. Did you start reading that or not?
Yep. Yeah, I didn't finish it, but I did start it. I will go back to it.
Well, did you get far enough to meet the female character and she's auditing the hospital and finding the problems?
I think I was leading up just to that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't get very far.
No, I didn't. Because I was doing it on a trip, and it was a quick trip, and then I didn't get back to the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick drive. Yeah, but
I finished both of those. One of them was on a trip to somewhere.
Mm-hmm. That's the best time for me. For audiobooks, it's just perfect.
Yep. Because I just finished Flight of the Intruders, which is an older...
Oh, nice. See, my problem is I have all these... I have a big back catalog of Star Trek books I'm getting through. All right, Alan. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast.
Yep, that's the end of the show.
We would like folks to join us live. We do the show on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Boom! Over at jblive.tv and jblive.info. And look, you can go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar and get it converted to your own local time zone. Easy peasy.
Yes, because as Chris has pointed out numerous times, apparently time zone math is hard, even though I do it in my head every week.
I just don't want to teach myself something that a bunch of hairless monkeys made up. I just feel like it's not worth it. Also, we'd love to get your feedback. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link, choose TechSNAP from the drop-down, or start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.